April, and today for the conflict resolution class taught by Professor Osborne, we will be talking about conflict advice and the comparison in different conflict advices. We will be looking at first the book Having That Difficult Conversation by Cloud and Townsend. The first conversation we'll be looking at is a conversation with a spouse, which is discussed in chapter 21 of Cloud and Townsend. And some of the advice that they give in having this conversation is that, first of all, every good marriage has confrontation. It is normal for a marriage to have confrontation. It's what you do with that confrontation that matters. And so the first step that they say is to be the best spouse possible. Be all that you can be to be the best for them. And then the next step is to appeal to the relationship itself. Rather than appealing to your argument or the other's argument, appeal to the relationship itself. When you're having these conversations, you are fighting for the relationship. You're not fighting for a winner and a loser. And use your history and credibility. With a spouse, you have history. So use that history. Use the credibility you have to appeal to the relationship, to be the best spouse possible, and to manage this confrontation well. Next is persist. Be persistent. Keep moving forward. Keep pressing in. And if you don't have the opportunity or you don't feel like you can persist, then learn to persist. Take steps to slowly persist more and more, to be stronger, to fight more, and to do these steps as you work to be the best spouse possible. And realize your spouse needs something from you. If you are in a confrontation, your spouse needs something from you. That's why you're arguing. That's why you're in this conflict. And so realize spouse needs something from you and offer that. And to be satisfiable. So often in conflict, we aren't satisfied unless we get all that we want. And in spousal conversation, it's beneficial to be satisfiable and not hold to such a high bar. 6 Steps for Resolving Conflict by Dennis Rainey also offers some conflict advice in having a conversation with a spouse. And they say when resolving conflict, it requires these 6 things: knowing, accepting, and adjusting to your differences. There's differences in your marriage. There's differences in each person. So knowing and accepting those differences. The next one is defeating selfishness, which is similar to being the best spouse possible, putting yourself aside so you can focus on your spouse. And that goes into the next step, which is pursuing the other person. Put that other person first. Recognize, like Cloud and Townsend said, that the other person needs something from you. And the next one is loving confrontation. This wasn't recognized too much in Cloud and Townsend, but recognizing that you might need to confront them on something and doing that in love. And then forgiving them, forgiving the spouse of what they've done. And returning a blessing for an insult is the final one. And so in this relationship, you need to have humility, and you need to recognize that when insulted and when frustrated and when tensions are high, bless your spouse. Like Cloud and Townsend said, your spouse needs something from you. The next conversation we're going to look at is a conversation with a parent. Parent and child relationships are difficult, and so many sources talk about how difficult it is to have this conversation with a parent and an adult child specifically. And so Cloud and Townsend in chapter 24 of Having That Difficult Conversation suggest a few steps to have this conversation. 1, love and honor your parents. This is from a child's point of view. When you're having this conversation, love and honor your parents. And then they say, do not obey your parents. The point here is that you don't do everything your parents say because you're your own person and you're stepping into this new relationship. And it's different. And so you have to realize who you are and step into that. Then when you're confronting your parents, confront out of concern, not dependency. You're not dependent on your parents anymore. Your goal now is to confront them from concern. The next is do not idealize confrontation. Confrontation doesn't need to be the main thing you do in your relationship with your parents. Sometimes it's good to not confront. So don't ideal confrontation. Confront when necessary. Confront when there's a habit and there's a rhythm and it happens multiple times, not when you see one thing that you don't like. Distinguish between hurt and harm. Convey your love and honor. Know your parent. Evaluate the resistance. Be direct. Decide whether the conversation is worth it, and helping both mom and yourself. And so these steps are all about knowing when to have these conversations and knowing how to convey your love and knowing how to communicate with your parent and knowing how to evaluate what's going on. And then when you know you need to make that step, be direct. When you know you need to have that confrontation, be direct, because then you know it's worth it. And then help both yourself and your parent to speak truth in conviction. The next source that talks about this is Strained Relationships Between Adults and Their Parents by Douglas Murphy. And what he talks about is in this relationship, there's always a problem, and you have to recognize there's a problem. If there's a conflict, there's a problem, and both sides need to recognize there's a problem. And he talks about working towards being comfortable, not meeting the parents' expectations. And this goes back to what Cloud and Townsend said in Don't Obey Your Parents. You don't need to meet all the expectations of your parents. You need to be your own person. Then he says, you don't need to explain or defend your position when you are walking in what you believe you need to be doing and it doesn't meet your parents' expectations. And he says, it's also important to acknowledge the relationship. He uses the example of sending a letter to a parent to let them know that you still love them, that you're still there. But you don't need to have expectations for that relationship. It's important not to expect that they write back or expect that they do exactly what you want them to do. And then oftentimes conflicts involve many relationships in the family. So build those relationships with other families and family members and don't talk negatively about the parents or other family members. Then the final conversation is the conversation with those in authority. Cloud and Townsend argue that when you're having a conversation with those in authority, there's a progression. You begin with a relationship, you're building a relationship, you're being intentional. Then you clarify the problem, you clarify what is the issue that's going on in your own head, and you say, okay, I want to do something about this, but first I need to own my own part. So you own your own part and you understand this is what I have done. So in the conversation, you bring the problem forward, you own your own part, and then as you're doing this, be mindful of your tone, that you are speaking with respect, you're speaking with care, and that you recognize that you're talking to an authority figure, you're not talking to a friend. Be specific in the problems, be specific in what you see and what you want done, both on your own part and both on the part of the authority figure. And then as you're confronting the authority, don't confront a single event. Confront patterns. Confront things that have happened multiple times, not something that's happened once. And then tie these concerns into what you want to see happen in this relationship and in your role in the company. So tie it into your goals. And then suggest alternatives rather than scheduling showdowns. Rather than saying, let's fight this out, schedule an alternative with your boss. That maybe we change this or maybe we do this. You're being proactive, not reactive. Then use the existing structure that's in place to have these conversations. And then know when to give up. In an authority conversation, this person still pulls rank and they still have authority over you. So know when to stop fighting. And then another source for this is, do you have problems working with authorities, by Danette Seibel. And in this, she says, recognize you have a problem. When talking to authority figures, recognize to yourself first that you have a problem. Then positively handle feedback and criticism. So as you're talking to an authority figure, you recognize you have a problem and then ask them what they see and handle the feedback and the criticism positively. And then encouraging brainstorming and listening to new ideas. This goes back to being proactive rather than reactive. Scheduling alternatives, encourage brainstorming, listening to new ideas. And then she says to resolve conflict before it diminishes your results. Don't wait to resolve conflict with an authority figure. Solve it sooner rather than later. But Cloud and Townsend would also say, wait till you see a pattern. So there is a balance there. She says, learn to delegate. When you're leading a team and you're taking on too much and it's making you frustrated, delegate that to your team members. And then get over it. Get over the do it my way mentality. This will help you to be concise and to focus in on team rather than self. Then the last thing is take a good long look in the mirror. What are you bringing to this situation? Going back to recognize you have a problem. Going back to you are bringing something to this conflict. And what I recognized in all three of these conversations is that most sources have a united presence on how to handle conversations with spouses, parents, and those in authority. The sources that we looked at today were How to Have That Difficult Conversation by Cloud Townsend. We looked at Murphy and the strained relationships between adults and parents, Rainey, 6 Steps for Resolving Conflict in Marriage, and Shelby in Do You Have a Problem Working with Authority Figures? Thank you. Have a great day.